Hi, I'm Reed Peterson, and welcome to Grief Refuge. It warms my heart to know that you're here listening today, for you see, Grief Refuge is a very special podcast. The fact that you're listening right now is a validation that you care about yourself, you care about your grief, and you care about your healing. It also says that you know personal care is important, and you're interested in learning healthy ways to manage your grief. And that's why Grief Refuge is special, because that's exactly what you'll get here. The Grief Refuge podcast is here to help validate your grief journey, the difficulty involved, and it provides hope and inspiration to manage this process and help live well. Through the stories and conversations shared in this podcast, the intention is to be a source of comfort and hope, and also a soothing voice to help you through feelings of despair, emptiness, loneliness, and uncertainty. Grief is so hard. I'm glad you're here, and I promise to do everything I can to help provide more support to you. Before we begin today's episode, let's cover a little housekeeping. Because of the depth and the nature of this topic, it may be more beneficial to not multitask while listening. Rather, I invite you to use this time for your self-care and personal reflection. Use this time to relax and allow your grief-related feelings to run their course. Use this time to mourn your loss. Also, this podcast publishes episodes twice a month. When you're grieving, that's a lot of space to fill in the in-between. So if you need more support, download the Grief Refuge app. The Grief Refuge app shares supportive audio messages every day to help cope with and manage your grief. You can get the Grief Refuge app from either the App Store on iPhones or the Google Play Store on Android phones. Thank you, and let's move on to today's topic. Today I have a special guest that I'm overjoyed to share our conversation with you. Patty Reis is a friend and a fellow grief companion. We met each other in the spring of 2020 through the Center for Loss and Life Transition. Patty and I have a kindred spirit connection. She's been a tremendous support for the hard work I'm doing with the Grief Refuge app, a source of wisdom to learn from, and someone I look up to because she speaks from her source of compassion and empathy every time we speak to one another. Patty is a gift in my life, and I hope that what she shares with you today is also a gift to yours. Please enjoy our heart-filled conversation. Patty Reis, I'm grateful and appreciative you're here with me today to have a wonderful grief-related conversation. I extended an invitation out to you because, Patty, you're a special person in my life. Now, for you listening, there's a bit of a backstory. Patty and I know each other for at least a year and a half, perhaps a little bit longer. It took us quite a while to meet in person, but we were a member of we'll call it a book club group for grief support. And Patty's the facilitator, and this is all with the Center for Loss and Life Transition. And so we had pretty much a virtual connection and a virtual relationship for probably a year and 4 months or something like that. And then we got the opportunity to meet in Fort Collins, Colorado, in person, in physical form. And we realized, oh, we both do have three-dimensional shapes to us. So, Patty, it's an honor and a pleasure to be here. I want to start by saying, I want to compliment you first. Here's how I perceive you, Patty. You're a person who has a deep soul. And that soul, I can tell, has been shattered by many of the events in your life. And in my perception of you, you choose to continue to do what I would call good, which is being a person of a helping hand, a warm heart, a person who shows up with compassion and shows up with empathy to help support others. And I'm really hoping to learn more about what drives you to do that today, Patty.
All right. Well, gosh, thanks for that intro. That was very sweet of you. Wow. I don't know. I think, since a little bit about my loss, I lost my two oldest kids January 1st, 2012, in a triple murder suicide. And, that took the wind out of my sails for a while. But I think I went back to not initially, of course, but after a year or two, I started to find my footing again, and I went back to what defines me as a person, which I didn't really know. Hadn't really articulated that to myself, like what defines me as a person. And I discovered that any time in my life when I ran into some transition, or whether it be forced or chosen, I needed to learn about what the transition was about, what I'd been through, what I was going to go through. And so I would do some research, read a book, ask some people, whatever. But then, and then I would do the transition, going to college, getting married, having kids, any of those huge life transitions. And then I didn't stop there after I experienced that event. I then turned around and started to teach it and open up space for other people who were now going to go through that part of life that I just went through. And that sort of was how I processed, life events. And this tremendous grief and tremendous loss was no different. So, 2.5 years or so after my kids were killed, I bumped into Dr. Wolfeld's work and went to my first training in December 2014. And man, I didn't know what I was doing there because most of the people there were already in the counseling world and I was not. I didn't know what I was going to do with the information I learned except use it to process my own story. So I didn't really go in with any plan, but now I, have found that I do the same thing as I did in the rest of my life. Now I'm opening up space for other people who are going through that same or similar loss. Does that answer your question a little bit?
It sure does. Yeah. It's really thought provoking. It really there's many angles I could take into this. However, I wanna stay in the heart energy, because it's easy for me as an outsider looking in, and I guess the right word is assuming that you, uh, in losing two children, I just feel like it could ruin anybody's world, and it can really make someone want to give up on life. And I understand that these are my projections, but at the same time, I don't even know what is bringing the words out from me and saying this. I just feel tremendous emotion, truthfully, in speaking to it. But it's still such a mystery, Patty, for me, and knowing who you are and knowing how you show up in my life and in my world, and also hearing about how you show up in other people's lives and their world too. And I'm like, was there ever a moment in your life before losing David, before losing Karen, after losing David and Karen, where you were like, life sucks, or have you always been super, for lack of a better word, optimistic?
I know that being optimistic and embracing life has defined me, my whole life. I've been through some ugly stuff, as when I was a kid, and I handled that a lot differently. Like I pretty much put it on the shelf and decided it wasn't going to affect me. But trauma when you're a kid always comes back. It defines us all. How we what trauma we went through as a kid. One thing that, and to answer your question, yeah, I wanted to pull the plug on my life several times. I know what despair is, but I never took that next step of really wanting to check out to the point where I started to plan anything. One thing that helped me reset from, and I'll separate this. Before David and Karen were killed, my troubles were less, my troubles were smaller, but they were the troubles I dealt with at the time. They were my demons. And whenever I got into that swirling vortex sucking me down in life, I would read a Holocaust novel. I would read a novel about the Holocaust. And because that always helped me reset and helped me put my troubles into perspective and find a way out, find a way to find something to appreciate, find a way to grab onto gratitude or joy or beauty, nature. And I was actually reading when David and Karen were killed. The current book on my nightstand was a story about Shackleton, who was marooned in his ship with his shipmates in I don't even remember if it was the Arctic or the Antarctic, but they were stuck in the ice. And I, of course, never finished that book because, David and Karen's murder interrupted my life on all levels. But that just kind of sums up where I was in life. Like I need a reset. I need to figure out how these people dug in and found their resilience and found their will to live and found one more thing to live for. And that always reset me, those kind of things.
Thank you, Patty. I like the way that you use the word reset. You've really got me thinking about it. It's in your context, I guess it's almost like an invitation. And I haven't really thought about a reset that way in my past. So I'm grateful for some of the things that I'm learning from you today in this deeper conversation.
There's one more thought about that reset part. And this was sort of inspired by my mother-in-law. Her name was Mary Allen, and she died in '04. And she and I got very close. And I loved the relationship I had with her. Really interesting friendship. We were so different, I'm the engineer, I'm the, technical one, and she never went to college and really different. But she had 9 kids. So so she knew a lot more about life than I did, and it was really neat to share the things that she knew about life. And one of the things she invited me to do when I got to that place of, I'll say now, needing a reset, but of course, when you're in it, you're not looking for a reset. You're just in this spiral going down of, my life sucks and, everybody hates me or whatever, you get into this really swirling, nasty part. And she would always invite me to reach out of that place and, for lack of a better way to say it, just reach out of that place and love someone else. And I would sort of throw up my hands when she would say that. I'd be like, "What? I have nothing to give. I'm completely empty here." I'm begging, I'm to the point where I'm actually verbalizing this to someone, and I've got this deep ache, and she would, invite me to reach out to someone else. And at first I was not too happy about that, but then I would try it, and I would, because I didn't know where else to go, and that always helped me maybe reset, and out of my emptiness, if if and when I accepted the challenge to reach out, it always helped me find my way.
Mm. Wow. So appreciate you sharing that. Mm.
Yeah, she was a fun lady, and with 9 kids, uh, many children running around, you notice stuff that you might not notice if you only have 2 or 3. And so that was really fun to hear her perspective on life, and yeah, and those things. I remember once she asked me, "What do you need? What do you need in life?" And I was like, that was back in my Superman days, I guess. I didn't need anything. I could do anything. I didn't. I was not vulnerable, and I was not needy at that time in my life, and I couldn't answer the question, "What do you need? What do you need in life?" And to this day, I still hear her saying that, and I have to ask myself that question: What do I need today? And to really try to articulate that to myself, and then grant it to myself as a gift.
Mm.
And that's helped. When we talk about self-care and grief, I had a hard time connecting to self-care, and it was her words. What do you need? What do you need today? What will soothe your heart today?
Mhm.
And I heard from that, nobody's going to show up and do that for you. You have to provide that for yourself. You have to go get that for yourself. You have to go ask. If what you need is from someone else, you have to verbalize that and ask them.
Mhm.
So she was a good piece of wisdom for my life, way before my kids were killed.
Definitely sounds that way. Yes. What's her name?
Mary Helen.
Mary Helen. Grateful to Mary Helen also being on the Grief Refuge podcast too.
Yeah, yeah. She always, whenever Karen spoke to Grandma Mary, Grandma would look at me and say, "What did she say?" Because she couldn't understand Karen. She had a soft voice, and Mary Helen was, her hearing was going a little bit. I'll never forget her face, always looking at me. What did she say?
Mm.
And so after Karen died, one of my first images was that Grandma didn't have to ask me what she was saying anymore.
Mm.
Sweet little image of them chatting, and Mary Helen understanding everything she said.
Yeah, I'm going to hold space for that for a minute because it is beautiful.
It's cool. So in the beginning, and Reed, you'll have to cut me off if I'm going the wrong place with this, but something that I discovered from the trauma of losing my kids to murder, that's a nasty image of imagining your children being shot. And that stayed with me for a really long time, that trauma. Of course, I wasn't there and I didn't see their bodies, but as a mother, I think that's where you go. You just imagine it as in great detail and graphic and so on. And so that in the beginning, maybe 2 years or hopefully less, that image, that play by play, second by second, slow motion video of how they died consumed me. I had a movie going on in the back of my head 24/7 of the incident. And anytime I got new information, like when I got their autopsy reports, when I got the ballistics report, etc., I would add data to that movie, or my brain would. I was not in charge of this movie for sure, because I tried to shut it down many times and I couldn't. But that movie would go nonstop, 24/7 on repeat in the back of my head for a couple of years. And I was consumed by it, and I found myself talking about it to pretty much anybody who would listen, including the pizza guy. That's kind of one of my jokes, is the poor pizza guy who delivered the pizza, got invited in to see the picture, in the entryway and to hear the story. I'm sure he ran away going, holy crap. Anyway, I discovered that the death story consumed me in the beginning. And through classes with Dr. Wolfelt and just allowing space for that story to be heard, slowly, that death story let go of its grips on me. And slowly the life story started to come back in. And as I told the death story, I started hearing myself. I sort of invited myself to add something at the end of the death story about their life story. So they just didn't, I didn't want people to go away from my death story and just think of that image. I wanted people to hear who they were and how they lived, in addition to how they died. And so that was really helpful for me to add those little things onto the end of the death story. Right. So, for example, I would add just a very short thing, and I'll share it with you now, so you know a little bit more about David and a little bit more about Karen. And David's is that he liked to quote, "You're never to be old. Wait, you're never too old to be 5." And that, what that means is he was always up for a good time. He's always up to makes something mundane to be fun. So, for example, if you're going to the grocery store with David, somebody's riding the horse. Somebody's riding the horse that you got to put a quarter in, or everybody's going to ride the horse, and it's going to be fun, and we're going to see how many people we can get on the horse or whatever. And he was 27 or 25. So he was going to be a good time, even if you were just going to the grocery store with him. And Karen's story is that, she worked at Trader Joe's, and she lived close enough to Trader Joe's to zip home on a break. And so one day, one of her coworkers was having a birthday, and so Karen had made an ice cream cake for her coworker. And so on a break, they ran home to her condo, and they were going to share this ice cream cake. But when they got to the refrigerator, and it was one of those, the refrigerator was on the bottom, the freezer was on the top unit, the ice cream cake had frozen to the bottom of the freezer. And so in order to share this birthday cake in the short time that they had, they just dragged the bar stools over to the freezer and ate it right out of the freezer. And I love that image of her, she and her friend just gobbling down this ice cream cake right out of the freezer with the door, opening. And anyway, so they both knew how to love, and they both knew how to share with their friends, and they both knew how to have fun in their own ways. And so those little stories started to be tacked on to the end of my long rambling recount of their death story, until I slowly learned how to tell my story better, and their death story became shorter and shorter, and I didn't have to share all the details with everybody. And I learned how to slow it down and just tell the most important information. But I always finished with their life story, something about their life, so that whoever I was walking away from might remember their life story, not their death story.
Yeah, that's a beautiful articulation, and I can only anticipate how helpful it will be for everyone hearing this. And so thank you for that nugget of wisdom. And I guess when thinking about an evolution from telling a death story to a life story and including both. There's probably no other way. I'm thinking about the events that happened in your life, and I'm sure it was, for lack of a better word, just a perfect practice of helping you and in the grief process and helping you transition and evolve and transform from data and death to death and life.
Another thing that helped me was to imagine that I died instead of them. And then what would I want them to do? What would I like to see, shining on them from heaven, when I was peeking out through the clouds or whatever. Uh, what would I want to happen to them in their life? And, because grief sucks. It it really can shake you to the core and question your own worth and why am I living and so on. And that was scary to think that my kids would go through that. And so I tell my surviving kids, we have 2 surviving kids, and I tell them, when I die, it better knock your socks off. It better, you better miss me so bad for a couple of weeks. And then I want you to start remembering the hilarious times, the fun times, all the Thanksgiving dinners and, the throwing people in the pool and, the I wanted them to remember that stuff, and I didn't want them to be completely consumed by grief, which is so easy to do.
Mm-hmm.
But I told them they better miss me bad for a couple weeks. Yeah, I wanted to give them permission to feel crappy, but I also wanted to let them know to live and to live more fully than ever. And so, thinking about that, that's what I would want for them. I sort of projected that on myself, and that I bet my kids would want me to live and to live fully and to find even more fun and joy and depth out of life.
Well, Patty, if a lot of people, we both know, a lot of people say, I'm just stuck, I'm stuck in my grief, or I'm not healing. The phrases go on, and for me, it's it's somewhat heartbreaking to hear it because I hear a lot of expectation come from people, and so if you're in a situation, because you do provide support to a lot of people, you facilitate a lot of support groups, and you speak at conferences and events. You probably do other things that you haven't told me about. But this is part of you as compassionate and empathetic and almost like being a light when people are really seeing more of the dark. In Ellen's terms, a source of borrowed hope to people. But what do you find yourself saying for people who would tell you, I'm just stuck, I don't know what to do, I can't make any progress, I can't get any better, I'm frozen, I'm falling off the deep end here?
It really depends on the person, but there's a time when we all, hit the bottom of the barrel. And, it's really important to know that there's light out there, that there is a way out. There is another world up above that big hole that you're in. But sometimes you just got to sit in it. And I think it's really important to know that there's somebody that'll come sit in there with you. But when you're done sitting in the dark hole, then I think the way you get out of it is find somebody else in the dark hole. just like my mother-in-law said, reach out of your emptiness.
Mm,
Do something for somebody else, as tiny as it doesn't need to be huge,
mhm,
but do something for someone else. Reach out, go find a friend who's got a death date that's looming large. Their child's death date's coming up or birthday's coming up, and just reach out to them and tell them that you're thinking of them. That's it. Just a
mhm,
tiny little thing, and that can help, bring the light into the dark hole, I think.
mm. Do you fill your calendar with reminders? Because you shared with me how many contacts are in your phone, and I'm like, how can you bring to memory that many events and that many dates and that many people to reach out and let them know you care for them?
You know, I I I have all these dreams of being super organized one day. And I started this I got this little calendar book, and I started entering everybody's birth dates and death dates in there, thinking that I would, open the month of June and see who we have coming up this month. And yeah, I kept that up for a few months, and there's probably a couple hundred people in there, but I forget to look at it. I don't know. And so I just trust in, I want to say my gut feeling or the Holy Spirit or something. And when I have somebody that pops into my head, I I don't just let that thought run out again. I'll pick up my phone and I'll text them, thinking of you, thinking of your daughter, whatever the image is. I have a friend who lost her husband, and he was a bike rider. We used to work with him in Ventura for many years, and he would ride his bike to work every day without fail. And one day I saw a guy on a bike. I was driving along, saw a guy on a bike, and just had this like image of Chris riding his bike to work. And, at the next stoplight or whatever, I'm texting his wife, Linda, hey, thinking of you. Saw somebody that reminded me of Chris.
That is for sure one thing I appreciate about you, which is the fact that you do take action when that idea comes to mind. And it does make such a big difference in people's worlds. It has made a huge difference in mine. Um, you know, as Grief Refuge goes off the ground, right?
Mm.
You've been a tremendous support there. And also, there was a thing that you shared with me recently that actually is going to make me cry right now. At the time of this recording, you were recently at the Rise Festival in honoring some of your loved ones. Um, and you blew me away, Patty, when you sent me that message that said you included Warren, who is my stepfather, on that thing. I thought to myself, why in the heck would she ever think about Warren at an event like this? She never met him. That just is such a
uh,
testament to who you are and just how amazing you are, Patty. So thank you.
oh, that's really sweet. So the Rise Festival is this really cool thing outside of Las Vegas where uh, you buy tickets ahead of time and you get two Chinese lanterns with your tickets. And they're just paper lanterns, and you light them, and there's some fuel in the middle, and you light it, and it causes the hot air to help the lantern rise. But before you light your lantern, you can decorate it with markers. So of course I brought my markers along, and I just tried to write down all the names of. I wish I had taken a list, but I don't know. I just sat there and wrote down names of people that had died, and people that I remembered, and I don't know. So your stepfather's name is Warren, and I also had another Warren in my life, and there's not too many Warrens on the planet, so I always remembered his name. And it was actually Warren Carter who, so he was a volleyball grandpa, and he was in the stands with us as I watched my girls play volleyball over the years. And Warren was the one who said that to me. And what he said was, when God puts somebody on my heart, that means I'm supposed to like do something with that. And pick up the phone and call him, text him, send him a note, whatever. And I always remember that about Warren. And, when I went to his funeral after he died, I thought he was just this nice old grandpa guy. Oh my gosh, there was just hundreds of people, thousands of people there. And I thought, wait, I thought he was I didn't realize his life had touched so many people, and it was really amazing. I just thought he was a simple volleyball grandpa. And so because of that connection with that Warren and your Warren, I have always remembered his name.
Mm. Well, deep gratitude to you. And like I said, I just was overjoyed with surprise. I'll put it that way. It was amazing.
It's nice to be remembered. And, after David and Karen died, a lot of their friends were in the time of their life that they were getting married and having babies. And gosh, I was so touched that some of them have named their children after David and Karen. And now we have 10 babies named after them. And, it's kind of like being Insta grandparents in a way. And I certainly can't keep up with all of them as much as I would like to. But I love it that, there's boys named after Karen and girls named after David. And I just love the names they've chosen. And it's really fun to know that David and Karen's spirits live on through their friends. And, one day that their parents will tell them who they were named after and why, and how David or Karen touched their lives. And that just makes my heart warm. I'm so touched by them.
It's beautiful to think about how their stories and their lives will live through these children growing up and changing the world.
Yeah, I love the people that their deaths brought to my life. So in the beginning, I hung out a lot with, the other F-18 pilots and the naval aviators who, are guys that live large. They anybody who can slam a jet on a carrier in the middle of the ocean, has to have a lot of self-confidence. So these guys tend to be, arrogant and hilarious and way too self-confident, and they can drink more than any human should. And I really enjoyed being with them in the first few years. I heard stories about David that I hadn't, I wasn't there. So it was really fun to fill in some of the time that David had on the planet that I wasn't there for. And it was really fun to hear that. I found that David's friends were much more accessible to me than Karen's friends. And Karen's friends, were certainly moved by their deaths too. But David's friends, I don't know. I think it has something to do with them being pilots and them already having buried one or two of their friends. And so they were possibly a little more comfortable with death, or have at least had to confront death, or death confronted them before. And they had this Navy family that the girls, Karen's friends, had never really experienced. And I was on the receiving end of that. The guys from that squadron were amazing. And, for a few years, I had connections all over the world because of, where they were and how they've been deployed. And it's still amazing. Karen's birthday was a couple days ago, though, and I got a call from a couple of volleyball players. And that was really neat because, they weren't quite as open and available to me in the very beginning. And so, we're almost 10 years out, and it moves me that people still remember them. They still remember Karen's birthday. They still remember David's antics. And so to those people out there who have recently lost kids or recently lost loved ones, in the beginning, you're surrounded by friends and family, and you feel that amazing support. But then as the months go on, maybe you feel like that support has gone away. But it is really nice to know that even after 9.5 years or whatever, there's still people out there that surprise me and come back with, gosh, I was just thinking about Karen the other day and remembered this story and thought I'd call you. So it's nice. It's not every day, but it's great to know they're still remembered.
Most definitely. And I kind of feel like there's something almost thematic about this. Grandma Mary Helen's advice and, her words of wisdom and reaching out, and Grandpa Warren too. There's something about it that I feel like as generations and new grow up and new generations, start, there's going to be a lot of that going on in your world. It's beautiful, Patty. Absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, reaching out. That's a great way to sum it up. When we're in the depths of the depths, you can still reach out. You still have that choice. You still have that power to affect someone else's life, even when you feel like yours is in the bottom of the hole.
Such a great teacher. Thank you. I'll tell you what, I'm aware of some of the things you do professionally, some of the ways you show your support to others, and a lot of them are in support groups. How many support groups are you facilitating right now, Patty?
So I have 3 grief support groups right now and 1 book study group. So that's more than usual for me, but each of those 3 groups are from different organizations or whatever, and it's kind of like the perfect storm right now of I do like a 7-week support group per church, and that one's just starting. So that I don't do that year round. It's only 3 times a year or so. I usually have 2 going. That's fine for me. 3 is kind of a stretch.
And you're also a speaker. You present at conferences too. Can you tell us a little bit more about the, for lack of a better word, the desire to speak?
Wow, I don't know. I think it's just the few times I spoke in the beginning, to whatever group, I was just so shocked at how helpful it was to people. When people would come up to me and tell me they never thought about it that way, and how helpful that perspective was. And I thought, oh, okay, well, maybe that's a good thing to share. So, for example, I speak at the Parents of Murdered Children conference. I have done that a couple of times, and I like to do 2 presentations there. One is some information that I learned about the people that show up in our lives after we lose someone in our life. That people come into our life in grief in a couple different categories. And I was really perplexed by my friends and how they showed up or how they didn't in the beginning. And so once I kind of had these categories in my mind, it made so much more sense about what the heck they were doing and why they were saying the things they were. And more importantly, what I was supposed to do with that information. So I'm not sure if you have the time for me to go into that or not, but that might be another podcast, maybe.
We'll definitely save it for another podcast.
Yeah, so I'm glad that a perspective of mine is helpful to people. And once I started getting that feedback, it encouraged me to speak more.
Well, Patty, you're a gift in my life. You're a gift to Grief Refuge and everyone listening. Thank you so much for being here with us.
It was great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
A special thanks to Patty, and a special thanks to you for listening. Conversations like this are meant all for your benefit, whether that's a new perspective, something to reflect on for your own personal healing, or even just another voice to listen to to help ease loneliness. The Grief Refuge Podcast is here for you. I'm grateful for you, and I'm honored you trust me in supporting your grief process. This is the work I'm meant to do, and I hope our paths cross in the near future. Before saying goodbye, remember to download the Grief Refuge app from your phone's app store for more grief support on a daily basis. Thank you, take care, keep honoring your grief, be kind to yourself, and talk to you soon.